Again, we are under the same time restrictions, so I'll dive right into it. Mr. Holder, you're Managing Director of Cube Root Farms. You have developed an automated indoor farm out of a used shipping container, featuring an enclosed climate control environment. Share with us, how did this idea come up? Technology, the innovation, give us your thought process and and what was the results.
Thank you very much, and I humbly observe all protocols. So it came out of a need for diversification between my colleagues, and one area we saw was indeed agriculture, and this was back in 2018, pre-COVID. So what we embarked on is basically to develop a indoor farm. And we chose the 40-foot container. But what we really wanted to do was develop it using totally local resources and also local products as best as possible, fabrication, construction. A lot of persons were directing us to things like Freight Farm and other companies. But we saw the promise of two things: indoor farming, which is vertical farming, growing vertically, as well as having an urban environment or any location, be it a garage, 40-foot container, a warehouse, to convert into basically a controlled environment. And then subsequent to that, we developed a strawberry container, and that's our second container that we built in the middle of COVID in 2021. I would say from my experience point of view, it's very technical to get into the controlled environment arena. But what I would advise to everyone is that there's a lot of potential that you see from it, and that there's what you should try to do is try to get as much diversification, because that's going to limit your risk. So if you want to go into greenhouses, no problem. If you want to do outdoor, no problem. But when you start to understand the whole environment of indoor agriculture, it complements everything.
Absolutely. I mean, in the Caribbean region, many of us are small islands. We don't have enough arable land to do production, so these types of innovations are absolutely necessary. I'd like to jump across to Mr. Burkhoff, who is the General Manager of Berry Cove. Can you share with some of your companies involved in greenhouses as well? Can you sort of share some of the lessons that you would have learned in terms of developing greenhouse products, and why is that the future or one of the major aspects of the future for Caribbean farming?
Yes, thank you, and pleasure to be here. Yes, I am the GM of Berry Cove, and we're working hard to get that project built, but my role really is in our companies that are developing greenhouse projects throughout the region. One of the things that we looked at as a company is a regional application, not an island, a singular island application. The issue of food import and fresh produce import is constant throughout the islands. So when we looked at solution sets, we had to look at greenhouse technology solutions that would be applicable in every location, islands and mainland states in the region. One of the biggest threats is obviously our annual hurricane threat. So one of the first things we did was engineer the strongest greenhouse system in the world, essentially a system that's engineer certified to Cat 5 hurricane strength. Because without that fundamental need covered, we could not attract any investment, we could not be insurable. So it all starts with the foundation when you're building a house and the house itself. So that's where we focused our attention initially. Then we started looking at, obviously, climate and risk mitigation within the environment inside our greenhouse systems, and looking at how we could improve hydroponic systems that were also going to be productive in the region, right? With our microclimates being very different from place to place. So what we did is really develop from the ground up an integrated approach. None of what we're doing is new in the world. Everybody's doing it all over the world. There's you know, it's a $300 billion industry now. So what we tried to do was look at understanding and living in the Caribbean, understanding what our pressure points were here, is to try to create an integrated technology solution specific to this region, right? So that's where we started, and we have, you know, projects underway now in a number of different islands, all of which are custom designed based on that climate and the conditions that exist, including water resources, energy cost. You know, they all come into play when we're engineering our greenhouse solutions for that particular location.
Great. I'd like to turn over to Mr. Ramdani. I mean, I have in my notes that, you are involved in the value-added production of sweet potato fries, cassava fries, dasheen fries with locally sourced inputs. Sure. What advice would you give other persons who are seeking to get this type of transformational change in the region? Mm-hmm. How can this model be replicated throughout the Caribbean region? What would it take for it to be, for other persons to get into this type of farming?
So first of all protocols deserve, and thank you for having me here. When we were looking at setting up an agro-processing facility 4 years ago, we wanted to do something that's totally different and to bring a transformational change across the value chain, from production to packaging to what a consumer will also do when they get the product in front of them. There are 3 objectives we wanted to achieve in doing that. 1, you look at health, because there's lifestyle diseases in the Caribbean, sure, and how we can use the products to produce food that is healthier. 2, produce food that uses locally grown crops within the region. And 3, using innovation to push the limits in food production, right? So that you can be able to bring transformational change even in the way we consume the food as well. So to get into that, to bring that transformational change, you have to look at what the Caribbean market needs, lacks, and use the advantages of that to be able to generate products that can bring sustainability and also transformational within the sector as well. The challenge, though, is that when you're looking to set up an agro-processing facility, you have to have data, and it must be a data-driven facility as well. When we initially started, we were trying to get the farmers to start giving us data. What are the chemicals used, what are the kind of production, the size, everything we wanted to standardize. So while initially it was a challenge, now they are conforming to that standard. That data helps us to feed our business intelligence software, and there's an AI element that do forecasting for us as well. So that forecasting now gives us the ability, for example, if there's rainfall in the near future, okay, this particular product is selling more, maybe you should buy more of it because the price could go up at this point in time. So those are the things you have to look at and start, because we are in an age of digitization. If you're looking to get into the industry, look at what are the challenges, what are the advantages, and start using innovation and applying it across the various segments.
Excellent, great advice. I want to come back to Mr. Holder, and maybe this question can sort of go towards the entire panel, because I would imagine the experiences that each of you gentlemen would have had would have been unique. Maybe you can tell me what were the major constraints, and I'm sure there probably were many, but what were the major constraints that you face in building capacity for this type of farming, and how did you overcome it? So maybe your top 1 or your top 2.
Yeah, well, in my particular case of more or less becoming a manufacturer, and trying to bridge the gap and enter new areas, there were a lot of challenges in terms of persons understanding it. A lot of people think doing an indoor farm is very expensive because that's what they see in the US. But when you are able to re-engineer and understand the technology, it brings it down to a reasonable cost. And then one thing that I also had to see was people don't look at the economics of growing. What is the yield annually per year? What are, as was mentioned, what are some of the inputs that are used to actually get the growing? So for me, I am passionate about getting the youths involved. I hope they come and see the strawberries in F10 and F11.
Give them samples. You promised them samples. They might come.
All right, you'll get some samples. Right, we have the delegates. We might have a little package if you want strawberry jam. We have some there as well. Yeah. So for me, it's really And just one thing I just want to enter, because I listened keenly to the entire discussion, and there were just two areas that was hinted on, and that is bioenergy and waste. So we have spoke about food, but we haven't really covered the whole circle of what do we do with the amount of waste that goes to the waste dumps and the energy that could be derived from it. So even though we may look at energy as and point leases and stuff, we can start to see energy through algae fuels, gasifications, and biodiesels, as well as biodigesters. So those are things that we are looking at to integrate. And once you have energy, you have food that could feed everyone.
Excellent. And like I said, food for thought for future discussions in terms of energy and waste. Mr. Burkhoff, same question, constraints and what do you think could be the solutions? Maybe you could sort of bring in maybe some support. What can the private sector do with government support to overcome some of these constraints?
Yeah, the question that was posed to me was, how can we use this technology and broaden it out into a much more of a regional solution, right? And the easy answer is money.
Right.
But it takes a lot more than money. It takes, government leaders to open the doors to inviting in new technology, which in turn means, under their finance and customs groups understanding that this equipment is here to grow more food. What we're focused on is import substitution, right? So if the general agenda is we need to stop importing some of the foods, that's what we're focused on, and only that, right? Using controlled environment agriculture, we can grow a lot of different temperate crops, right? It's virtually, theoretically, we can grow anything. It really comes down to horticultural science and how to create the right inputs in the environment. But to broaden this out, it's going to take a group will throughout CARICOM and all of the leadership to open their doors, and I can tell you that we have been welcomed in many of the countries and the leaders that sit here. Then we just need a piece of land and a willingness. We do need to work closely with the ministries of agriculture. There are a lot of issues, so things like a pest risk analysis unit is usually part. We have to order our plant material 4 or 5 months in advance. So we need some streamlining in terms of all of the agricultural aspects of putting this type of farm operation in place.
Great, thank you. I'll turn it over to Glenn. Maybe from the point of view, what were the challenges you're facing in terms of maybe sourcing local produce? Because that's what we're talking about today. Utilizing local produce in our agro-processing and our manufacturing part. What are some of the challenges you face in actually getting this local produce into the actual production process?
So one thing we have seen is farmers, they have the capacity to produce.
Yeah.
Right? During the pandemic, they have produced a lot when the government came out with their food bag to help those during the pandemic, and the farmers did very well. Because we have products, we're taking products further down the value chain and doing creative things such as instant bag choker, instant tomatoes choker, and those things. We have seen growth, even at the export market where the demand is high. So because of that, we have to think